James chapter 3 and verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Let us pray together. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your word, and we do pray that your Holy Spirit would guide us and lead us and speak to us as we go through your word. We do pray that you would give us ears to hear your word, to listen to your word, and then to do your word, to put your word into action. And so, Lord, we thank you for this time, and we pray that our hearts would be ready to receive your word today. May you do an amazing work through your word today. Amen. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. That is found at the beginning of James's letter, and he makes that amazing promise. If you remember weeks back now, James makes that promise in the opening few verses of his letter. If you are lacking in wisdom, and if we're truly honest, we all have to say we're all lacking in wisdom. Well, here's a promise and an invitation. God invites us to come to him and to ask in faith, because he is the source of wisdom. He is wisdom. And this is a beautiful promise, right? Because if we ask in humble faith, in grace, he is willing to actually grant us wisdom. Now, God doesn't just give a little wisdom. It says that he gives liberally to all who would come to him in faith. So that's the promise that we read at the beginning of James. We now fast forward to our text today, which is found in chapter 3, and now James is once again going to pick up this theme of wisdom, focusing on what this wisdom of God, and which comes from God, looks like. And basically what we're going to see today is he's going to contrast this wisdom from God, in essence, with a counterfeit wisdom, with a fake wisdom. So basically today, I want you to think of it this way. There is a wisdom that comes from above. So it comes from above down, but there's also, in some ways, another wisdom which comes from below. And that wisdom which comes from below is not wisdom at all. In essence, it's foolishness. So as we go through this text, in essence, keep in mind this imagery of there's a wisdom that comes from above, there's a wisdom that comes from below. And the wisdom that comes from above, this is true wisdom. But the wisdom that comes from below, it's a counterfeit. It is foolishness. So let's see what James has to say about these two, in essence, contrasting types of wisdom. And so he begins in verse 13 of what we read. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. We begin by reminding ourselves that God cares about our actions. He cares about our conduct as Christians. And as we've seen already, the overarching theme of the book of James is faith in action. So please hear me, right? We are saved by faith alone, through grace alone, not by works. This week, I work at a homeless night shelter project, a Christian-based project, and on one of the nights, one of our residents, no, it was in our morning devotions, one of the residents, he was like, you know what, I'm afraid of death. And he's like, look, I believe in Jesus, but then he said this, but I just don't think I've done enough. I don't think I've done enough to guarantee that when I die, I'm going to go to be with him. And it was actually a great opportunity to then share the good news of Jesus, which is that none of us have done or can do enough to earn God's love. Rather, our security comes not in what we've done, but rather in whom we're trusting in. You see, we as Christians, and the Christian faith, what in essence the key thing that sets it apart from every other world religion is every other world religion is a works-based system. It's a system that if you do X, Y, and Z, then you might earn God's favor, you might earn God's love, whereas the Christian faith is no, you're not good enough to earn God's love, but rather you receive God's love as a gift of grace. So please hear me, and as I said to the guy at our devotions, we are saved by grace through faith, not of works. So if we truly believe that Jesus is our Lord and Savior and accept him as that, we can be confident that because of what Jesus has done, our eternity is secure. So it was a beautiful chance to reaffirm that, and that's what I want to remind us. We're saved by grace through faith. But what I will say is this: genuine faith leads to genuine change, and that is what the book of James is all about. In essence, so that if the faith is genuine, you should see that faith lived out. You should see fruit of that faith. In essence, you should see change, and one of the areas we should see change in our faith is in essence, how we conduct ourselves, how we live out our lives. And as we see here, we as Christians are called to live our lives in the meekness of wisdom. In essence, think of it this way: if we claim to have faith, we should see evidence of that faith. And likewise, if we claim to be wise, we should see evidence of that wisdom. As we see here, look, who is wise and understanding among you? Look, if you claim to be wise, then there should be evidence of that by good conduct done in the meekness of wisdom. And so what is wisdom? How do we define what wisdom is? And we looked at this quite a few weeks ago, but this is a slight refresher. So wisdom, in essence, is the ability to discern what is right and what is true, and then to act accordingly. So wisdom, in essence, is correct knowledge applied, or you could even say like skillful living. It's more than just mere intellectual knowledge, it's knowledge applied. And that also encompasses moral issues, but then it also encompasses issues which aren't necessarily moral, but are in need of wisdom in how we navigate it. One person describes wisdom this way. Think of it this way. Wisdom, he says this: wisdom is the fitting application of knowledge. So knowledge understands the light has turned red, but wisdom applies the brakes. So knowledge sees the quicksand, but wisdom walks around it. Knowledge memorizes the 10 Commandments, but wisdom obeys them. Knowledge learns of God, but wisdom loves God. You see, wisdom is not just intellectual knowledge, but rather it's knowledge applied. And wisdom is something that we all desperately need because it affects our everyday to-day life and even beyond. Wisdom will affect how we relate to God, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, how we relate to the world we live in. And this is why Tim Keller says that wisdom is not only for deep thinkers, it is how you get through daily life. So what does this wisdom that God gives look like? Well, first and foremost, it is marked by meekness. You see here where it says, Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. Basically, meekness, it speaks of humility. Humility is understanding that the universe doesn't revolve around me. Humility realizes that I need help, and humility realizes that I don't know how to do life as I should. Humility understands and sees myself for who I truly am, but then it also sees God for who he truly is. And this is why the book of Proverbs tells us that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Wisdom begins with me humbly coming to God and saying, God, you are God and not me. God, I need you. God, you know better than me how to do life. This is what true wisdom looks like. It's from God. It comes from above down. But there is a counterfeit wisdom, which in essence, it's foolishness masquerading as wisdom. And at the heart of this counterfeit is pride. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your heart, do not boast and lie against the truth. Let me give you a definition of bitter envy. This is a definition of envy by a guy called Jerry Bridges. And listen to this. He says this: envy is the painful and oftentimes resentful awareness of an advantage enjoyed by someone else. Sometimes we want that same advantage, leading to the further sin of covetousness. And sometimes we just resent the other person having something we don't have. I'm sure, if we're honest, that definition has described each and every one of us at one point or another. How many times have we become guilty of becoming bitter and resentful towards someone who has something that we don't have, who has an advantage that we don't have? Over the years, since from sort of age of like secondary school through to college, through to university, I studied music and specifically studied drums, learning how to learn this instrument. And I remember that during that time, there were many times I was tempted to become envious of other drummers, right? To see somebody who's better on the instrument than me, or maybe they're experiencing better opportunities than me. And it's so easy to then look at them and be like, oh man. And envy begins to creep in. You become resentful of them. And it's such an easy thing to do, right? How many times do we look at other people and like, man, they've got a better house than me, they got a better job, a better family, they got a better spouse, they got better looks, they got better health. Fit in the gap, right? How many times have we done it? That this goes on, that we see somebody with an advantage and then we become resentful towards that person. And if that describes us, well, James wants us to know, he says that this isn't the wisdom of God. If that's the path you're on a different path. And I think one of the reasons we envy, and one of the reasons that we can't be content for others to have what we don't have, is in essence linked to the second part, which is self-seeking. Now, self-seeking, that term is quite, it kind of describes itself, right? Switch it around, right? To be self-seeking, it means that which you are seeking after is yourself. In essence, to simplify it, self-seeking is just basically making it all about me. The one who is self-seeking, in essence, puts themselves at the center of the universe and then makes everything and everyone else revolve around them. It's what I want when I want. In essence, I become God, and either you get on board with that, or you need to be jettisoned out of my way because it's me. It's about me. That kind of wisdom is appealing. Like, let's just be honest. It seems right to seek myself. It seems right to affirm whatever I think or whatever I desire, and if anybody else isn't affirming that, then I'm going to have issues with them. There is something appealing about self-seeking. And so we boast about it. We can even take pride in it, not realizing that what we are doing is lying against the truth. And what is the truth? Well, the truth is found in the next verse. This is the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, it's sensual, and it's demonic. If you think that envy and self-seeking, if you think that's the way of wisdom, well, James tells us you're believing a lie. The truth is that envy and self-seeking, that kind of wisdom is a counterfeit wisdom. It doesn't come from above, it doesn't come from God. It actually comes from below. You see, self-seeking and envy, this is not of God. This is not the way of wisdom. This is the way from the wisdom that comes from below. This is the way of foolishness. And he explains it this way. This wisdom doesn't descend from above, so it doesn't come from above. But this kind of wisdom, it's earthly, it's sensual, and it's demonic. Woof. Strong words from James, right? If we are envious of others, if we are self-seeking, then we are acting in accordance with a wisdom which is earthly, which is sensual, and which is demonic. When we think of earthly, it's not talking about like the physical ground or the physical soil, but in essence, where you could use the term worldly as well. In essence, think of it this way. Often when we see kind of the term worldly or earthly used figuratively in the Bible, it's kind of speaking in essence of the unsaved world around us. In essence, man's capability when seeking to live apart from God. So whether that be in his views, in his beliefs, in his actions, in essence, this wisdom originates from this is kind of manly wisdom. In essence, manly wisdom apart from God, if that makes sense. So that, in that sense, it's earthly. The second sense, it's sensual. The idea of sensual is basically when a sensual person is somebody who is governed by the gratification of their senses, their physical desires and appetites, right? In essence, I have a physical desire, I have a physical appetite, and I'm governed by making sure that's gratified. That's what a sensual person is. And then demonic, in essence, that which is of Satan and demons. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, right? Satan and demons are real. And so, we need to realize that if we are living in a way which is envying others and self-seeking, we're acting in a way which is earthly, which is sensual, and which is demonic. And it's interesting how those three things kind of touch on the things that we struggle with as Christians, right? Right, we do struggle in the influences of the unsaved world around us. We struggle sensual. If you think about our struggle with, for example, the flesh internally with ourselves, right? And then the struggle with the enemy, with the demonic. It's interesting how those three things touch on that. But think of it this way, right? That's the kind of wisdom. And this is a kind of wisdom that self-seeking falls into, and this is what it leads to. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. So this counterfeit wisdom is going to lead to confusion. The kind of Greek words used there can be translated as instability, disorder and commotion. It's the idea of just kind of chaos and mess going on. And what else? Every evil thing. If your life is governed by the wisdom of envy and self-seeking, it will ultimately not lead to life. It will lead to confusion, and it will lead to immorality. I'll give you one example of this that we can find in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and it's in the events of Saul and David. So in our Tuesday Bible study, we've been going through 1 Samuel and now currently going through 2 Samuel. And basically, there's this moment in the book of 1 Samuel when Saul, he was the first king of Israel. And although his reign kind of started with great promise, tragically, his heart turned away from God. And then basically, we read that David shows up on the scene. Now, most likely, he was just a teenager at this point, but David, through God's might, defeats this giant of a man called Goliath. And what happens is after that battle, David goes on to win many other battles against the Philistines. And there's this one point where he returns from these battles, and this is what we read. 1 Samuel 18 and verse 7. So the women, they sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And then Saul was very angry. And the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000? And to me they have ascribed only thousands? Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day forward. So think of it this way, right? A new song makes it into the #1 charts in Israel, and it leaves Saul fuming. And isn't it interesting, right? It's not a case, his envy is coming from the fact that they ascribed more to David, right? How often envy and jealousy, right? It comes from, it's not just about having something, it's about having more than somebody else. And so here's Saul, and he develops a resentful awareness of this advantage enjoyed by David. And so bitter envy, it reigns in his heart along with self-seeking. And so what do we read? He becomes consumed with himself and trying to keep a throne that God has already promised to take away. And what we see, what follows is great evil. Saul makes multiple attempts on David's life. There's even a point where Saul has a whole city destroyed because David had briefly been there while he was on the run. Saul was living, being governed from the wisdom from below, and it led to death, it led to destruction, it led to every kind of evil thing. This is not the path that we should be following. The book of Proverbs, in essence, kind of touches on, in kind of the opening chapters, talks about the voice of wisdom and the voice of foolishness. And how the voice of wisdom is calling out, but also the voice of foolishness is calling out. And the question is, well, which are we listening to? Will we listen and be governed and guided by the wisdom that comes from above? Or will we be governed by the wisdom that comes from below? One is going to lead to death, but there is one that's going to lead to life. James is now, having described the wisdom that comes from below, he's now going to describe the wisdom that comes from above. Now, sometimes we can be guilty sometimes of focusing on the things that we shouldn't be doing, and that has that place, right? The things of like, look, as Christians, we should not be doing X, Y, and Z. But sometimes we forget that in essence you are replacing those things with things that you should be doing, that you should be pursuing good things, right? It's the Christian faith is not just a thing of like have-nots. It's a thing of actually, no, what you may be saying no to, God has something better for you to replace that with, to pursue instead. So this, what we read of now, this is the wisdom that comes from above. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, and then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, and without hypocrisy. So true wisdom that comes from God. So it comes down to us from above. This is what it looks like. Let me just quickly go through these different aspects. First and foremost, the wisdom that is from above, it's pure. That Greek word used there, hagnos, can be translated as clean, innocent, perfect. Notice that he says the wisdom that is from above is first pure. As in some ways, as in this is the first, the most important aspect of wisdom. Wisdom is that which is pure. Now there is, in essence, a moral element to wisdom. Tim Keller, he explains it this way, and it's true. He says this: wisdom, it includes being moral, but goes beyond that. It is making the right choice even when there are no clear moral laws telling you explicitly what to do. So yes, there are aspects of wisdom and making wise choices that are not necessarily moral issues. Let me give you a couple of examples, like where should I live? What job should I take? Like choices which require wisdom, but they aren't necessarily moral. But first and foremost, wisdom guides us into what is morally right and away from that which is morally wrong. True wisdom from above is pure. It's not unpure. Or another way we can say it is, true wisdom from above, it's not sinful. So when we sin, when we do that which is wrong in the eyes of God, we're not acting in accordance with his wisdom. So first and foremost, realize that wisdom is pure. It's not sinful. It's not pursuing sin, but rather it's pursuing purity. Second thing we see that wisdom is, it's peaceable. Whereas the wisdom from below, what does it bring? It brings about confusion. It brings about division, right? It brings about commotion. While the wisdom from above is peaceable. It seeks to make peace. It brings about reconciliation. Are you a peaceable person, or is everywhere that you're going, are you bringing with you and creating conflict and division, right? We kind of see, and sometimes you see that, right? Maybe even you've been that person, right? No matter what situation you go to, no matter what relationships you enter into, it seems like you just end up just bringing conflict and division. And that often easily happens when you are self-seeking. But the wisdom that is from above, that is peaceable, it doesn't go out seeking or creating conflict or division. The wisdom from above is gentle. The way I like to kind of think of gentleness and kind of gentleness and meekness, they're kind of like very similar terms. And I've heard this used of meekness, and I think it applies also to gentleness, is that gentleness or meekness is not weakness, but is rather strength under control. So when we think of gentleness, I want you to think of, in essence, of strength under control. So being gentle is not necessarily about being weak. Being gentle is about strength, but under control. And there is a gentleness, a delicacy in how you are treating someone or responding to someone. And I'll kind of give you an example of what that kind of looks like. For example, Paul, when writing to Timothy, and he gives qualifications for eldership. And one of the qualifications for eldership, so for leadership in the church, is gentleness. Really interesting, right? If you think about it, when you are thinking of looking for a leader, how many of us would put on the CVs or things to look for gentleness? Well, that's exactly what Paul says, that when you're looking for elders to lead the church, one of the qualities and qualifications you need to look for is then their lives need to be marked by gentleness. But interestingly, at the same time, one of the roles of an elder or a shepherd or a pastor is to protect the flock, to guard the flock from wolves or from false teaching or from various dangers. So on one hand, the teacher the elder must be gentle, but then the elder must also be willing to protect, he must be willing to confront, he must be willing to rebuke. In essence, think of it this way, it's a person who is marked by gentleness, who uses their strength in order to serve and to protect. It's strength under control. I'll give you another example. Think of I've got a son who's 3 months old, Solomon, and I need to be gentle with him. And especially when he was firstborn, like he's a bit more robust now, but especially when he was firstborn, but even now, how I am much, much bigger than him. I'm much, much stronger than him. And what I do is, in how I treat him, how I handle him, how I move him, it's with a gentleness, right? Because I know that my strength is much bigger than his strength. So my strength is under control. There's gentleness there. But there are moments where I might need to protect him. I might need to defend him. And in those moments, that strength will need to be used. It will need to be applied in that way of protecting him. And we see this with Jesus. A gentleness with Jesus. His strength under control. But then we also see his strength being used when it needs to be used. So the wisdom that comes from above is first pure, it's peaceable, it's gentle, it's willing to yield. Now, wisdom is first and foremost, it's willing to yield. It's the idea of willing to submit. So it's willing to yield, it's willing to submit to God and to his words. See, pride says, I'm not willing to yield. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody? You're trying to implore them to something, right? And maybe it's in terms of like, it's actually a good thing you're imploring them to. With the word, right? You're showing, look, like this is what the word of God says, that this is what he's calling you to, what he's calling you away from. But the person is just like, no, I'm not yielding. I will not yield to God. I will not yield to his words. Well, wisdom is being willing to yield. Wisdom has the humility to realize that I'm not always right. Wisdom has the humility to say, you know what, I'm willing to yield when I'm confronted by the truth. When I'm confronted by the truth of God and his word, I'm willing to yield. That's wisdom. Wisdom is full of mercy. That word mercy can be translated as compassion or tender mercy. And the idea of being full of mercy is it's not just a little bit, but it's full, right to the top. So imagine feeling like you've got a bucket and you fill the bucket with water and you fill it right up to the brim, to the point it's overflowing. Well, that's the idea of that wisdom is full of mercy. Not just a little bit of mercy, but it's full of it. And then the other mark of this wisdom from above is good fruits. Godly wisdom, it produces fruit. You can be confident that if you are following the path of wisdom laid out before you by God, it will lead to fruitfulness and life. Let me say that again. You can be confident that if you are following the path of wisdom laid out before you by God, it will lead to fruitfulness and it will lead to life. And sometimes we need to realize this because often the wisdom that comes from below or foolishness is often going to be the quick fix. It's often going to be something which promises something which it can't deliver, something which is kind of promises to be quick and instantaneous, whereas often the way from above, the way of wisdom, is actually making good and wise choices in the here and now, which you won't see the immediate effect of until further down the line. It's actually making harder choices, more difficult choices, but which are wiser choices, which will lead to flourishing and to good fruits. So the wisdom from above, it produces fruit, but then he gives these two things which this wisdom from above doesn't have. So this wisdom from above is without partiality. So in essence, we looked at this a few weeks ago. So wisdom from above is impartial, right? So it doesn't show unjust favoritism. In essence, it doesn't judge or treat people differently on a very superficial basis. Okay, so it's without partiality, and then this last one, it's without hypocrisy. In the ancient world, if you were to go to the theatre, or if you go to a play, you would often see one actor playing multiple characters in the same play. And in essence, the way it works is they would have different masks which they use for their various different roles. And basically, this is the image that is being created. Whenever you see that word hypocrite in the Bible, that's the kind of image being created. It's one who is playing a part. It's one who is acting. In essence, it's one who is putting on a mask. And that's why Jesus often criticized the Pharisees, right? He called them multiple times hypocrites because they were putting on masks. Because internally, their heart was far from God, but externally, it looked like they were doing everything right. Wisdom that comes from above, it's not playing a part. It's not being hypocritical. It's not putting on a mask. No, wisdom from above is without hypocrisy. And so wisdom, look how beautiful it is, this wisdom of God. It's pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy, good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. That is the wisdom that comes from above. But wisdom is not just a way of life. Wisdom is ultimately a person, and that person is Jesus. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 1, Paul writes this to the church in Colossae. He says this, "For I want you to know what a great conflict I have for you and those in Laodicea. For as many as have not seen my face in the flesh, that their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, and attaining to all riches of the full assurance of understanding, to the knowledge of the mystery of God, both of the Father and of Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge." In Jesus is hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. You see, wisdom is ultimately a person, and that person is Jesus. And think about it for a second, right? Jesus is wisdom. The wisdom that came down from above and came down into our world. That's Jesus. Jesus is pure. Jesus is without sin, completely pure, completely innocent, completely holy. Jesus is peaceable. Through Jesus' death on the cross, we can have peace with God. Jesus is gentle. We see throughout his ministry and how he ministered to the sick and to the lost and to the broken. Jesus was gentle. Jesus is willing to yield. Though Jesus was fully God, he humbled himself. He submitted to the will of the Father. He yielded to the Father, even if that meant going to a cross. Jesus is full of mercy. Because Jesus experiencing the judgment of God, we can experience the full mercy of God. Though our sin may be many, his mercy is more. And Jesus is good fruit. No life has been more meaningful, more purposeful, more life-giving than Jesus. Jesus is without partiality. Jesus is without hypocrisy. Church, Jesus is wisdom. The wisdom that came down from above, it's Jesus. And he came down from above this wisdom so that we could be set free and leave behind our lives of foolishness and instead follow him. And when we do, we experience fruit. Our final verse of James today. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. I want to be very clear that the Bible does not teach karma. In fact, the gospel is the very opposite of karma, because in the gospel we don't get what we deserve, okay? So the Bible does not preach karma, but what the Bible does preach is that you reap what you sow. So whatever you sow into is ultimately what you're going to reap. If you sow into the wisdom that comes from below, you're gonna reap confusion. You're gonna reap every evil thing. But if you sow into the wisdom that is from above, you're gonna reap life. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. In essence, peacemakers who are sowing in righteousness, they're going to experience the fruit of that. And I think one of the there is a parable that Jesus gives which perfectly illustrates that point, and it's where we're going to kind of bring our time to a close. And it's the parable of the wise man and the foolish man. So I'm going to look at Luke's account, although you can find it also in Matthew. This is Luke chapter 6 and verse 47. Jesus says this, "Whoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house, who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently against that house and could not shake it, for it was founded on the rock. But he who heard and did nothing is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, against which the stream beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great." You see, in this parable about a wise man and a foolish man, Jesus says, look, if you come to me, if you hear my words, if you do my words, you will be like a wise man building his house upon a solid foundation. You see, if we listen to Jesus, if we listen to the wisdom that comes from above and follow that wisdom and trust in that wisdom and apply that wisdom, it's like we're building on a solid foundation, so that when the storms come, and notice, storms come to both houses. The storm comes, but the house stands because it's built on the foundation. But the foolish man, the one who may even hear the words of Jesus, but does nothing, doesn't apply them, doesn't put them into practice, that foolish man is like building a foundation on sand. It's perhaps quick and easy to begin with. Such is often the foolish path. It's quick, it's immediate, it's easy, and yet when the storm comes, it comes crashing down. Worldly wisdom, the wisdom that comes from below, foolishness, it ultimately leads to the house come crashing down. But I want us to realize that there is a grace in that moment. Because if you have been on that path of foolishness, and you found the house has come tumbling down, and you're on the sand on the shore, and you see your house in tatters, you see it completely destroyed, there is this kind of thread of grace Because in realizing that, if you come to realize that the foundation was wrong, and now build again on a new foundation, you can experience the life that true wisdom brings. In essence, there is some ways a grace in the house come tumbling down, because it can, not always, but it can open the person's eyes to realize the foundation was wrong, and now let me build again. On the right foundation, on the foundation of wisdom that comes from above. Jesus is the voice of wisdom calling out to us. If we come to him, if we hear his word, and if we obey his word, we are beginning to practice wisdom, wisdom that comes from above. And so, church, as we pray, which wisdom are you listening to? Which wisdom are you turning to? Are you turning to the wisdom that comes from below, the wisdom that is foolishness? Or in your search for wisdom, are you looking up to the wisdom that comes from above? Let us pray together. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your word. We thank you, Lord. The truth is that in and of ourselves, we can't know wisdom. We needed an external source to give us and to lead us into wisdom, and that was you, God. That was you, Jesus. Thank you that you, from above, have come down to show us the path of wisdom. And Lord, I pray that we would seek and live out the wisdom that comes from above. Jesus. Forgive us for the moments where we have been governed by self-seeking, where we have been governed by bitter envy, when we have been governed by a wisdom that comes from below, which is earthly, which is sensual, which is demonic, and just leads to confusion and immorality. Lord, forgive us for the moments where we've pursued foolishness. And Lord, right here, right now, today, we want to choose to follow the path of wisdom. We want to choose to follow you. And so in every area of our lives, God, we want to look up. In the area of work, we want to look up. In the area of marriage, we want to look up. In the area of singleness, we want to look up. In the area of parenting, we want to look up. In the area of finances, we want to look up. In the area of every aspect of life and choices, we want to look up. In the area of emotions and spirituality, we want to look up. In the area of health and navigating challenges and difficulty, we want to look up. Because wisdom, true wisdom, comes from above. And so, Holy Spirit, we pray that you would empower us to follow wisdom, to follow Jesus. Amen.